Hello, everybody. We are live. I just found out. I see it in the chat window. Catherine typed it there for us. So, welcome to today's Nano Prep webcast. I am Grant Faulkner. I'm Executive Director of National Novel Writing Month. And I woke up today and I realized it's October 28th. And NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, starts November 1st. So, I'm counting down the days, not counting today. What do we got? We got October 29th, October 30th. October 31st. We got about 3.5 days to prepare for NaNoWriMo. So that might not sound like much, considering you're going to write a whole novel. So in some ways, I think this Nano Prep webinar will be a type of crash course to get ready to write your novel. But I want to say that I think you can do a lot in even just 3 hours. And I'll say that you can even prepare to write your novel in just 30 minutes. And I say that because I do a NaNoWriMo presentation every year, and about 30 minutes of the presentation is just like 4 or 5 exercises to help people get ready to write. And I've had numerous people tell me that was enough for them to write a novel in a month. So don't psych yourself out at this moment and say that you don't have enough time, even if you don't have an idea, because you can get an idea and scope it out and think about it in the next 3 days and be plenty ready to write. And we're going to learn more about how to do that today with James Scott Bell. So we've got this webinar plan to help you get over that hump if you're feeling an obstacle, or if you have a lot of ideas and you're ready to go. You can refine them today. But before we start, I want to give a special thanks to Wondrium, which is sponsoring this webcast and sponsoring NaNoWriMo as well. And if you don't know about Wonderium, it's a place for you to basically unleash your curiosity. And I say that because they have so many courses. And I think it's a great way to get ready to write your novel, to research your novel if you want to research it. They have unlimited videos and documentaries and various types of series and travelogues and courses and more. And I mentioned it as a way to write, but I think it's also a good way to research afterwards too, and also the writing courses that I mentioned. James has one on Wonderium, and Joyce Maynard does, and Jane Friedman. So they have all different types of courses to help you get ready to write your novel, to edit your novel and revise it, and to publish it. So it can take you through your whole writing and publishing journey. And I even learned to play the guitar once by taking Wonderium courses. So there's just a lot of things that they offer. And they're offering this special deal for NaNoWriMo writers. It's on our website under the writers resources section. There's a link called offers. So you can see it there. And I bet somebody's going to stick that link in the chat so you can see it. And the deal, though, is to get 50% off the quarterly plan for the first 3 months, plus a free trial, just using the link in the NaNoWriMo special offers section. And that offer expires December 18th, 2022. And later on in the webcast, we're going to have the Director of Recruiting, Will Schmidt, join us and tell us about Wonderium just for about 5 minutes. But most of the webcast is going to be talking to James Scott Bell, who I'm going to introduce right now. James is a man of many hats. He's the winner of the International Thriller Writers Award, and he's known for writing the Mike Romeo thriller series and the Ty Buchanan legal thriller series, among many other novels. He's written a bunch of writing guides, really wonderful writing guides. I'll vouch for them, which include the #1 bestseller, Plot and Structure, Just Write, Conflict and Suspense, The Art of War for Writers, How to Write Dazzling Dialogue, Write Your Novel from the Middle, Superstructure, and How to Make a Living as a Writer. And he's got a great course on Wondrium as well, as I mentioned, How to Write Best-Selling Fiction. And he's also a former trial lawyer, which I'm sure helps in writing thrillers. Welcome, James.
Nice to see you. Thank you for that nice introduction.
Sure. And I want to mention to our viewers to please put your questions in the chat. We're going to have time to answer your questions. We want to answer as many of them as possible, and we'll do that for about the last 20 or 25 minutes of today's webcast. But to start off, James, just so we can get to know you a little bit as a writer, you started as a lawyer, as I understand it. So can you tell us a little bit as your journey as a writer? How did you go from practicing law to talking with us today as a kind of writing guru?
Well, every lawyer wants to be a writer. Every lawyer thinks they have a novel in them. And sometimes that's the best place for it to stay. But a lot of lawyers have written, great legal thrillers. We all know that. And I caught that bug in the 90s. And it took me a while to learn how to write, because I'd been told in college that you have to you have to be born with it. You can't really learn how to write fiction. You can't study books. And so for about 10 years, I believed that. And then one day I said, I gotta see if that's true or not. And I began to study writing like I'd been studying in law school. And lo and behold, I found out you can learn. And because of that, when I started to get published, I also started to teach, because I wanted to teach other writers how to do it, what it was for me, and that they could do the same thing. So that kind of was the dual track. I began publishing thrillers and also teaching. And that's pretty much the way it's been for the last almost 25 years. And I love it. And NaNoWriMo has been a big part of that. I've boosted NaNoWriMo. I love it. I think it's such a great vibe for writers. And you're in this kind of world community doing this together. And so it's all good. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, James. And I thank you for that reassuring message that you can learn how to write. I always say the best way actually to learn to write a novel is to write one. It's hard to take courses on it before you actually experience it. And I think even though, as I mentioned, we're nearing NaNoWriMo, the start date of NaNoWriMo, I think some people oftentimes struggle to identify their novel idea, even at this point. Either they're deciding between two different ideas, or maybe more than that, or they're thinking oh, if I would write about vampires, that might get published more than this other novel that I really want to write. And so I'm wondering, and I want to refer to this Stephen King quote that I always think about. He says, "I believe stories are found things, like fossils in the ground." And sometimes we find them, but sometimes they find us. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that. How does one find a novel idea, and how do you decide that that's the one you want to write?
Great question. As far as ideas go, the writer's mind and imagination is like a muscle. And the more that you exercise it, the more receptive it becomes. And so I have always advocated, and I've done this for myself, is to spend an hour a week in just pure creativity time, just doing things to come up with ideas, test ideas, have fun. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes. And then you get what Stephen King calls the boys in the basement, the subconscious mind is churning as well. But there are some things that writers can do and should do intentionally when they're wanting to come up with an idea, say to write for NaNoWriMo. One of them is, and this is probably the one that is most used by writers, is the what if game.
Yeah.
You ask yourself, you see a scenario, you see something, some stimulus out there on the street or wherever you are, and you start to think, what if? And one of the things I could say to the writers out there is take half a day to take a walk or take a drive. And as you do, and as you observe people, even billboards, stores, ask yourself, what if? What if this man crossing the crosswalk is a serial killer, or an undercover agent, or somebody who's fleeing the law? You just start churning those things. You look at a billboard and you see a happy family, and you say, well, what if the father is a bigamist, and this is a second family, or anything. Yeah. And the thing is, it's not necessarily to nail down a perfect idea each time. It's just to open up the gates, and then something's going to click, and you take that and you nurture it a little bit. And that's one way. One other way I'll mention that is the old Law and Order trick, the TV series, which was usually based on some real case, is go to a small town newspaper website and read some of the news items. Yeah. And take that and play with it yourself. And those are just two of the ways to go about it. And if you're intentional about being creative, your creativity will kind of grow itself. And so that's what I would advise.
That's great advice. I actually grew up in a small town, and I know what those that section of the newspaper is the most read section actually in the newspaper, because it's the police report. So you get all the weird crimes that happen. Yeah, and I love the what if game because I think writing a novel, what if is somehow present on every single page of the novel you write, no matter what type of novel you do write. And when I mentioned earlier in the webcast that I do just 4 or 5 exercises to help people get ready to write, what if is one part of that, just like a 10-minute brainstorm of what if with like a character in mind. It's amazing how many plot strands you can uncover.
Absolutely.
And then, I just want to put in a plug here that that NaNoWriMo itself is a game of what if. And writing that first draft, I oftentimes call it the discovery draft because it is answering that question, what if? And I think I just want to relieve the pressure that some people might feel to have a perfectly orchestrated plot right now decided. You don't necessarily need that. And I even think of my own NaNoWriMo draft sometimes as a planning draft. And I actually write the outline after I've written the discovery draft.
That is really great advice. The great benefit of NaNoWriMo is making yourself, do those word counts and get to the next scene. And if you're worried about, is this the right way to go? That's going to hold you up. So you go there, and once you're there, and you write the best you can, then you stop and you think about, well, what could the next thing be? And you just keep going. And it's like you said, it's a discovery draft. There are writers we all know who write these massive outlines before they begin to write their novel. And then there are those sometimes called pantsers, seat of the pants writers, discovery writers, who just go. What I often say to those who like to write that way is that what you really are doing is writing almost a massive outline. When you finish that novel, you've got the material right there, and then you can begin to reshape it. So the main thing is to get through it, learn how to free your mind to write when you are actually writing. That's NaNoWriMo.
Yeah, that's great. That can sum it up. Learn how to free your mind, both to choose the idea, to write the novel, and even later in revision, I think, to a degree. Yeah. Well, we were swapping emails before this, and I know that you've literally analyzed hundreds of plots. And after analyzing all those plots, you came up with this method you call the LOCK method, which is lead, objective, confrontation, and knockout. And I know you even have dedicated a course on Wondrium to the LOCK method. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about it and how it might help a NaNoWriMo writer.
Yeah, like I said, back when I was learning how to write, trying to discover what would be the fundamentals that I need, the basic fundamentals that I needed to get right before I could write a novel, complete a novel. I kind of came up with this mnemonic, LOCK, lock, and lead, objective, confrontation, knockout. What that basically means is the first thing I want to know is who's my lead character. That's really the important first step, because your audience, your readers, that's who they're going to be connecting with. They have to have a caring connection with a lead character. So one of the first things you can do, and again, like you said, this could just take a few minutes, a half an hour, just come up with who's your lead character going to be. Ask what is their vocation, their profession, whatever their role is in life. So it could be, a cop, it could be a lawyer, it could be a mother, whatever it is. What is it that their, role in life is? And then you go on to the next question, which is, what's their objective going to be in this story? And when I talk about objective, I talk about death stakes. And what I mean by that is one of 3 aspects of death really need to be on the line for this character that the readers are going to want to follow. And there's physical death, which is, of course, you see in most thrillers. This character might die. But then there's also professional death. This is a good one for, well, let's say in a lawyer thriller or a detective thriller, the case itself is necessary for the hero to solve, or their professional life is over. and you make it that important. And then the third is psychological death. It's more of the interior character type of story where they have to overcome something or they're going to die inside. And so if you think about it in those terms, lead and a death stakes objective, you're halfway home. And then and then the confrontation element is the antagonist, the opposing force. And you've got to make that force stronger than the lead character so the readers are worried. And you've got to do a little fleshing out of that character. Give that character the attention that you give the lead character. And then finally, knockout ending. Now, a lot of people say, look, I'm writing a first draft. I don't know how it's going to end.
Right.
That's fine. But listen, here's what you should do. Once you have those first three elements in mind, come up with a knockout ending anyway. Think of a great last scene. Just go for the top, whatever it is, just make it, see it in your mind and write it down, make it that scene. Now, you have that scene to kind of write toward, kind of a little North Star off there in the distance. Doesn't mean you can't change it. You definitely can, but if you kind of sketch it out in your mind, it's kind of exciting to think, hey, maybe this is what the end will be like. But a lot of times it's subject to change, and that's great. But those four things, I think you line those up, and that'll give you a real good through line. Because in Nano, you want to have that through line so that you don't come up to like a brick wall and all of a sudden you don't know where to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. The through line. I always say that I just need to know the direction I'm going in. And it can take detours along the way, but I just need to know where it's going. I actually don't usually know the ending. I'm writing toward that. As I say, I like to write towards the mysteries or towards the answers of the questions, but not necessarily answer them. So can you do that? I mean, I'm just wondering, when you mentioned like knowing that ending and having it be a North Star, I totally get that. And I want to also tell viewers that there's plenty of lore about writers and endings and how many versions they've done. And I'm just thinking of this one Hemingway story I heard on NPR recently, that he wrote something like 34 different endings to Farewell to Arms, which happens, right? I bet you've written many endings to your work. Yeah, so it doesn't have to. So you have to do this thing where you know the ending, but remain flexible with it, I guess.
And one other thing about having an ending scene in mind is it kind of feeds your energy as you're writing. Now, as you go along, and this happens a lot, and it's happened to me frequently, is I get halfway, 3/4 of the way in, and suddenly I know it's going to be different. There's going to be a different character that's going to end up being the killer or whatever it is. However, and this is a great tip, you take that original ending and you kind of put it over here, you finish your book, and then you bring that ending over here and make it a twist. You can use it as a twist. You could put it before the new ending that you have, or you can do the new ending and then put it after. But it's sometimes a great way to give that little extra kick at the end. So nothing is wasted. You don't throw anything away. You put it in a drawer maybe, but you keep it for future reference.
Yeah. Do you ever do the what if game like that far into the novel towards the ending? Do you ever just pause before the ending and say, let's just explore different endings and do a what if exercise?
The what if part of it is more like, what else could happen? What could be worse? What a lot of times what I'll do, and by the way, I wrote a whole book on how to write endings. It's the part of the book that I spend the most time on.
Yeah,
because I want it to end with the readers feeling that that satisfaction, and we all know what that is when you read a great ending. But what I'll often do is when I'm getting to that ending part, I'll start doing mind maps. Doodles, the mind maps with the different connections, and I'll try a different scenario, a different connection, a different character over here. And that kind of frees me up for new possibilities. So I would say that a lot of the time, I don't know how much, I've done that where my ending has been something different in development. Usually, and almost always, whatever, if I keep that same ending, I'll be massaging it because of what's happened.
Right.
But it's open, and that's what I like to do with the endings. Is when I get there, I want to do some deep thinking about it, because it may work out the same way, but in a different pattern.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's great. I think it goes back to that lesson or best practice you mentioned earlier, just keeping your mind free and open, especially in these early parts of the novel. When we were swapping emails too, you mentioned that you advise writers to concentrate on action scenes, objective obstacles and outcome, and only hinting at emotions, which are best filled in upon revision. So I'm just curious what you mean about that, and by that, and how you can kind of segment that type of writing, being like drafting versus revision.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in our books, in my mind, the best books are those that have the action, but also have delve deep into the characters. We want to know, readers really want to know what's ticking inside the characters.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times we don't know exactly, because we're kind of watching, we're improvising this novel. We don't know exactly how the character's emotion is going to be triggered by something that happens. And a lot of times too, writers will take the first emotion, which seems the one that's the most logical. Like, somebody dies and there's immediate grief, or something happens, there's immediate anger. And that's kind of, I think, what you want to avoid, making a commitment on it first. Put a little note in your novel, a little placeholder to explore that emotion later, and then get on to the next action scene, because the action is moving the plot. The action is, dealing with that story objective. I find then that after I've done a first draft, I go back and I work with those emotional moments. I know which ones I want to deepen. I know which ones I want to make more original. I know which ones I want to expand. And I know which, because that's really how you control the pace in a novel. If you shrink those emotional moments, it's a fast pace. You can slow down. You can give some breathing space by expansion. So I find that's best to do after you've written it, and then concentrate on the scenes, going scene to scene to scene. And I think for NaNoWriMo, that's probably the best way to go.
Yeah, that sounds really smart to me. I mean, in the sense that sometimes writing about somebody's emotions and really getting them down, one, it's almost like going to therapy with them, right? It's pretty involved.
Yeah.
And then sometimes the language, you really are just really focusing on like a single paragraph. You're not really talking about the progression of the story on the plot level. Yeah, it's very different. Yeah, so that's interesting. Well, I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, because I always say that developing your creative mindset, as you call it, your writing muscle, is so important to writing something as long as a novel, even if you do it in just 30 days. And I think that what happens a lot, a pattern that we notice, is that a lot of people burst out of the gates with a lot of excitement for their novels, and they write, really strong for the first week or two. And then inevitably, and this happens to every single writer on the planet, you hit the muddy middle, whether that's at 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years. You'll hit it many times, actually, if you really finish your novel. So what would be your advice to writers? Because I think you have to right now get ready for that moment when you're gonna, and the muddy middle, like I would define it as when you start hating your novel, you start doubting yourself as a writer. You start maybe hating your story and wondering if you should even write it, all these things, a lot of negativity. So how would you advise somebody to get through that muddy middle?
Well, actually, I called this early on. I found it about myself, and I heard other writers talk about it. At about the 30,000 word mark, you come to this wall and you go, oh, whoa, wait a minute. And you're looking forward and thinking, oh gosh, I've got all this novel to go. Do I have enough material? Is my foundation set? I think part of avoiding that is, if you've got that objective factor down where it's death is on the line, that there's something big that has to happen. So that helps a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will mention a little technique that I developed, which I call the mirror moment, which is in a book I wrote called Write Your Novel from the Middle.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something I came up with after analyzing a bunch of books and movies, to asking myself, what is happening in the middle? What's that midpoint all about? And what I discovered, and it began to work for me, is that in a lot of these great stories and movies, right in the middle, which these writers who are skilled kind of reach intuitively, is there's a moment when the character has to reflect, as if they're looking in a mirror. They have to think about what's happening to me. And it's usually one of two forms. It's like the character is thinking, am I this kind of person? Am I going to be this? This would be the one place where I think you could actually brainstorm the emotion. The character looks and says, what kind of person am I? The example I use is Rick in Casablanca, which right in the middle, he's drunk, and his great love Ilsa comes to try to explain why she left him in Paris. And he basically just calls her a whore. He just is awful to her, and tears streaming down her face. She runs out, and he just puts his head in his hands, like, and you can tell by the acting, but in a book, you can actually spell this out. He's thinking, what am I? What have I become? And then the rest of the book is working that out. The other kind of mirror moment is when the character looks at the situation in the middle of the book and thinks, I'm going to die. There's no way I can win. This is what happens in the middle of the Hunger Games. They're right in the middle of that book. She thinks, wow, this is probably an okay place to die. And the rest of the book is about not the transformation of the character like in Casablanca, but more the gaining of strength. How are they able to overcome these death stakes and come up with the resilience and the skills to make it? So what I suggest, and this can also be done before the writing, is brainstorm possible mirror moments and come up with a list. I do this now every book I write. Come up with a list, 5, 6, 7. And almost always when I get to when I push myself to, and this is another tip, always push yourself to come up with something more than just the first thing that comes in your mind. I'll find that, 5, 6, all of a sudden that one goes pop. And I go, okay, that makes sense. And once that's done, I have a handle on both the beginning and the end of the book. It illuminates it for me. So that's a long way of saying, think about that mirror moment. And I have a lecture on that in the Wondrium course. And
cool.
And of course, I wrote a book about it, but it's just something that I've just found it fantastic. And as I started to teach that, I've had other writers tell me, this is great. This is wonderful. So
it's really that moment of kind of hitting bottom of a type when you're having a self-recognition or a self-confrontation, or wondering who you are. So that's interesting to have that moment. Well, I was intrigued that you'd talk to other writers and you have this 30,000 word mark as the moment when you hit the wall. And I remember a lot of marathon runners, they say that you hit the wall at the 17-mile mark, and it is kind of precise, like mathematically precise. And so I'm curious, because you have at this point, you've written so many books about writing. You've talked with so many writers and written so much yourself. Do you still have, I'm just curious, do you still have self-doubt? Do you hit the wall and kind of not know what to do next? Or do you just pull out these techniques and get through it?
Well, I think it happens less now. I think maybe because I've done it enough, and I've kind of developed my own theory about what I call signpost scenes, which I have 14 of them. I wrote a book about those too, but that are there like markers on a road. E.L. Doctorow used to say that writing a novel was like driving at night with your headlights on, and you can only see as far as the headlights. And then when you drive to that spot, you can see a little further, and you don't know what's coming around the next bend. And what I say is, if I have the markers that I know I'm going toward, then that makes the drive a lot more stable for me. And so, I have some key markers, like what I call the doorway of no return, that begins the actual middle part of the novel, and then that mirror moment. And then, like I said, I have an ending that I'm writing towards. So it hasn't been as much a problem for me as before. And I think a lot of the discovery writers, understand this problem. And I just offer some ways to help get them through it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, James. And I think this might be a good moment to bring Will Schmidt on from Wondrium. I have some more questions for you, and we're getting questions from the viewers. And Will's going to speak for about 5 minutes. So for all of you viewing, please, this is a great time to ask the questions and put them in the queue. So Will, tell us more about how Wondrium can work for novelists.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Will. I work for Wonderium. I've actually been there for 20 years. I've spent my entire adult life at Wonderium. So that's just a testament of kind of how cool of a place it is. So what is Wonderium? So Wonderium is a streaming platform that really focuses on learning-oriented nonfiction content. So it's things like documentaries, instructional videos, travel shows, and our sort of bread and butter, which is college-level courses. These aren't necessarily college courses. You're not taking them to get credit. You're taking them because they're fun to learn about stuff. So we've got a ton of content, over 800 titles, over 10,000 hours. I think it's probably over 12,000 hours at this point, on everything from astrophysics, philosophy, religion and history, to how to meditate, how to draw, how to play guitar, that got mentioned earlier. Language learning, we've got Spanish, French, German, and we're about to launch Japanese. And yes, we obviously have a lot on writing as well. Many instructional courses on writing, as well as a lot of courses on literature in general. So there's many, many ways this is great for writers. I think the first one, probably, and to be perfectly honest, probably the least important one, but as writers, I know this is important, is that Wonderium is a great place to procrastinate more constructively. Why do so many books about writing exist? Partly because writing requires craft, and you can learn that craft, as James is a huge proponent of, but also because I know writers, and there's nothing they love more than finding a way to procrastinate in a way they feel like is good for them. And that's includes reading books about writing and listening to courses about writing, but also honestly listening to stuff on history or science. This is stuff that actually benefits you. You can't spend your entire day writing. It gets very exhausting, as any writer will know. Wonderium's great because you can either watch the stuff, or you can turn the audio off, or turn the video off and just listen to it. So I listen to it while I'm walking my dogs and jogging. So it's a great resource, background. I'll let you fill that time that sort of otherwise might be dead time more constructively. But of course, there's more serious ways it's great for writers too. And Grant already mentioned this, but it's a great place to start your research. That extra level of detail by learning something about an era, about a concept, about a scientific concept or something like that, can really take your fiction from something that's decent to something that feels actually lived in and real. So, I mean, I've talked to plenty of writers we have a huge number of writers who are customers, and every once in a while I get to actually talk to them. So we've had people use our courses on opera and music theory to write a best-selling book. We've had a best-selling children's author, Award, use our courses on medieval England to use that as the research, the background to set his historical fiction. So it's an excellent place to start and often even conclude your research if you're looking to understand science, history, or literature better, or philosophy for that matter. It's because we pride ourselves in making these concepts and these ideas approachable and frankly enjoyable in a way that it's, you might have taken some college classes and on these topics, and it was only as good as the professors. And frankly, that's my job, to find good professors. So with Wonderium, that work's already been done, and that a great team is there making sure all the concepts are understandable and presented in a way that you can actually digest them. And lastly, and I think most importantly, Wonderium is an almost bottomless pit in a good way of inspiration. As writers, obviously you can draw on your own personal experience, and almost every writer does for that usually first semi-autobiographical novel. But once you get that out of you, or maybe you got several of those, who knows? But once you get that out of you, you're probably going to go beyond your own personal experiences. And obviously, a great way to do that is by reading. But also another wonderful way to do that is to learn about history, to learn about science, to learn about philosophy, to learn about these things. So Wonderium is just a giant supermarket of creative food for you. There's just so much there that can fuel your imagination, that can give you new ideas, take you in new directions, let you ask new questions about the world in ways that will just bounce all around in your brain and lead to wonderful new insights. I mean, just to give some classic examples of authors who did this, Game of Thrones was famously inspired by the War of the Roses. This isn't something you necessarily might learn in school, but it's a very well documented historical period. And frankly, you throw in some dragons and a lot of high fantasy, and you get a completely different story, even though it's based off of that. Likewise, Star Wars or the Foundation series and things like that were inspired by the Roman Empire and the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. So these are just some sort of almost cliched examples of how one thing can be almost transmuted by a writer's imagination into another. So Wonderium is a great starting place for that as well. We've just got tons of material, easily digestible in ways that you can just kind of bounce around and jumpstart your own creative life.
Let me just add to that I I was a customer of the great courses previously,
Yes.
That was titled for 30 years. I've been using your courses all through, and a lot of them for my writing. I put a lot of that material into my book. So I'm just a fan.
Yep.
not just a professor. Yeah. I'm not getting paid for that. I'm just saying it's fantastic, and I encourage everybody to sign up for it, not just for the writing, but just for the knowledge.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was a customer before I even graduated college, so before I even worked there. So it's been a delight and a real treat to actually work with the company for this stuff.
That's so cool. And Will, I really appreciated those specific examples about how writers used the research and how it infused their novels, and then how they.
Well, it's funny. So many of our instructors are, they're not often fiction writers, although some of them are. But they often, some of the best instructors are nonfiction writers who know how to write a good nonfiction book, which requires some level of narrative craft as well.
Absolutely.
And many of our employees are writers as well, including fiction writers. So cool. It's also a great place. I call it a halfway house between academia and the real world. So it's we're all kindred spirits with writers at the company, even if we're not directly fiction writers.
That's very nice. I also just want to put in a plug for your mention that, what do you call it? You call it productive procrastination. And
yeah, absolutely.
And I think procrastination sometimes gets a bad,
no, it's
a pejorative.
It's where the ideas come from. Yeah,
it's where the ideas come from. It's a creative moment. Yeah, go ahead.
Letting things bounce around in your head and finally take shape. That's why, like I use the example of walking the dog, but walking is a classic activity. There's a school of philosophy called the peripatetic school of philosophy, just based on the fact that often it takes time for ideas to gestate, kind of bounce around and fully emerge in your mind.
Yeah, that's actually my prime Wondrium listening is dog walking as well. So I was glad.
Yeah, dog walking. It's a good one because it's at a nice pace. It's usually a routinized activity, so you can kind of turn your brain off.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much, Will. And I'll go back to the viewer questions now. But if you want to hang around just in case there are questions about Wondrium as well, that'd be great. But thanks for that presentation. And James, let me think. So I got a question from Roseanne Carter. Asks, have you ever done NaNoWriMo before? Or do you go through similar periods to attain a certain number of words in a short time span? Like a lot of writers use the Pomodoro method, which is kind of like a miniature NaNoWriMo.
Yeah. Well, yes, I've done NaNoWriMo several times. One of those resulted in a novel that was published and became part of a series. So I've always loved it. I'm a big advocate of the quota. That was one of the first things I learned as a writer, and I know some writers kind of rebel at that. They don't, but to me, it's proven if you can get yourself to write a certain number of words consistently, they mount up so well. I look back at and see these books that I've written. How did I do that? It was because of this quota idea. Now, I used to do a certain number of words every day. I've tweaked that because I found that it gets a little hairy if you miss a day or something. You're going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? So what I do is and here's what I would advise: figure out how many words a day you could comfortably write, and space that out over a week. How many words? Cut and then divide that into 6 segments. So I would write six times a week to try to reach a weekly quota. And if I miss a day or something happens, I can't complete it, I make it up on other days. Now, obviously for NaNoWriMo, I'm going to be strict about trying to meet that quota every day for the month. And that's a good way to get yourself to stretch your abilities on that, because I think when you have a comfortable quota, which I advise at first, I advise the writers kick it up by 10%. Try to go for that extra 10%, because then you're pushing yourself. And I think you'll be amazed and pleased at how much you get done.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that way to do the math that allows you to miss the occasional day, because I think sometimes people do miss a day or two, they might get sick, and then they give up the whole enterprise. And we want people to keep writing fundamentally. Right. And sometimes you keep writing, you develop new momentum, and you actually catch up and surpass your word count goals. And I like that you mentioned just having a quota in general, because one thing I like people to know is that, most writers don't write 17, other than Stephen King, most people don't write that much every day of the year. And so, but you can get plenty of done with a novel writing at a smaller word count. So if you do 300 words a day, which is probably 15 or 20 minutes of writing, that's 9,000 words a month. That's 108,000 words a year. That's a huge novel. So take NaNoWriMo as your kind of training ground, but then keep the momentum going throughout the year at whatever quota is good for you. Yeah. This comes from Vic Podemska. Do you have any advice on how to let go of ideas? And what I mean is, how do you deal with writing yourself into a corner and deciding to abandon or change the scene instead of wasting more time on it? It's a decision point question, I think.
Writing yourself into a corner. Sometimes some writers actually say that's a good thing to do, because then you have to force yourself how to get out of it, how to move. Now, if you're referring to the book as a whole, I would say, when you're well into it, if you've got the foundational elements that I've talked about, don't ditch the project, but maybe take a day to kind of let it simmer and brainstorm some other possibilities, because there's also always different directions you can go. If you're talking about a scene, if you have the 3 elements that we briefly touched upon, the scene objective, which you got to have a character in the scene that wants something. And then you've got the obstacle to that objective, which might be another character, it might be physical circumstances, a combination of those things. And then you have an outcome where does the character viewpoint get the objective, or are they frustrated? Does it fail? And if you just take a few minutes, this is all, before you begin writing the scene, just a few minutes to go over those 3 things, that's going to save you that writing into the corner business, because it's going to give you the direction to go. And when you get to that ending point, when you get to that scene outcome, always try to ask yourself, what could be the next possible scene after this? And how could the outcome make the character's situation worse? This is really the key to page turning fiction, is that even if the character gains the objective, there's something that's going to happen as a result of that that's going to make their situation worse. Maybe a new character discovers what they did and they enter the picture, anything like that. But just spend a few minutes thinking about those things before you start to write, and that'll give you the momentum to go forward.
This is probably a good moment to cut to Liliana Lopez. Her question is, I would love to hear about writing action and or conflict. And just what you were saying about making things worse is that sometimes I hear from NaNoWriMo writers is that they don't quite have it in their heart to punish these characters.
Yes.
And I always remember what Nabokov said is that he wrote as if he was God punishing his characters, like keeping them under his thumb. Like he was very sadistic in his mindset towards his characters, but I take it from there.
That I've heard that you can't be nice. Stop it. Stop being nice. It's really true. The great benefit for me of a great novel is that whatever situation whatever aspect of death that character's dealing with, physical, professional, psychological, that the harder it is for them, the greater the sense of catharsis at the end. And so what you're really doing, you're doing a benefit to your characters if you're mean to them. Because here's the thing about characters. A quirky, interesting character is good for maybe 2 pages at the beginning. You don't really get to know a character, or you might even apply this to a person, until they're forced to go through a crisis, until they're tested. That's when real character comes out. So by being mean to your characters, you're actually helping them grow. So be mean.
I love it. I was going to say we can do the quote that being mean to your characters is a benefit to them. That can be the pull quote for this webcast to tease people to watch it. Yeah, I like that idea. Let's see. I'm going back up to Alexandra Slingsby's question. Can you have 2 mirror moments, or should you just focus on one?
I advocate one, because that's kind of the fulcrum for the whole novel. I mean, there can be a little incidents in between that kind of hint at what's going on inside the character. That's fine. But I have found this idea, and if you look at books and movies that way, look at The Fugitive, the great Harrison Ford movie. Right in the middle of that, he looks in the mirror. There's just been a SWAT team that surrounded this house he's hiding in, and he thinks they've got him. Turns out that they're actually after the drug dealing son of the landlord. But he breaks down because he's thinking, there's no possible way I can survive this when everybody's after me. And then, of course, the rest of the book is about how he does just that. So a strong mirror moment really solidifies the book and the character for the people. Now, here's something I've been asked. What if you have parallel plot lines? Like, let's say there's a romance and it goes back and forth between 2 plot lines. Then take each plot and put the mirror moment in the middle of that plot line. And, it may not line up exactly in the middle of the book itself because you've got these 2 lines going together. But it's a great way to solidify those parallel plot lines as well. So it's just a tool, and I advocate one really strong one for your novel.
Okay. Friendly Brilliant asks, do you ever avoid certain subject matter for fiction books to avoid censors, or do most publishers give a pass for fiction books on forbidden topics? Not sure what forbidden topics or censors mean here, but I guess it's just a matter of, do you not write about certain topics because of maybe you're worried about the reception of the publisher or the public?
Well, that's a marketing question, really. I like writers have the freedom to write about whatever they want about, but there's also the sensitivities in the market. And when you're working with an agent and a publisher, they're going to be your partners in that. They're going to want to keep track of that yourself. If you're writing for yourself, just be aware. Do I avoid? I probably do avoid certain subject areas that, well, for me, I don't like my writing to be quote unquote dark. I do go, I like trouble. I like all of that, but I like kind of a redemptive ending because I'm kind of writing to inspire. And one of the things I say about thrillers is that they are fear management tools. You know, they're like that's what the great myths were. They were a way for the community to learn how to confront the dark world and overcome it. But that's, you know, really up to you. Write about what you believe in, and then, you know, if it's becoming an issue for you, talk it over with some people. You know, get some feedback on the idea. You can do that. So you can also write a whole novel, like we're talking about here, and then take whatever material you came up with, and then you can restrict it, expand it, get rid of some. You can do as you please. So it's really more of a marketing question, I think, that you're asking, and you know, it's something to be aware of.
James, since you mentioned getting feedback from others, I'm curious about, do you share your writing? And you know, NaNoWriMo, I always say we're a writing event, but we're also a community, and that community plays a big role in everything we do. So I was wondering if you could speak to that a bit, about just what your feelings are about a writing community.
You mean sharing my material with the writing community?
Well, I guess it's a two-part question. There is the sharing of material, but I think a community is something bigger than just sharing material and getting feedback. It's really about so many things, right? I mean, it's about emotional support, swapping ideas, networked opening doors. You know, it can take so many different forms. But just the value of, I guess, having a community in general for whatever purposes you want.
That's very important. My personal take on whenever I'm writing, I don't like to share my ideas or my concepts or my material until I finished it. And then I go through a period of where I send it to my #1 editor, who I happen to be married to. And
good strategy.
Yeah. Take her notes, which are always good. I mean, she's great. Yeah. And then, you know, I'll send it out to some what's called beta readers, you know, people who have, I know what's going on. They've agreed to read my material. I just think that's better for me. So I don't want to get a lot of feedback while I'm writing. I want to, you know, get my vision down there. As far as the community goes, I mean, it's fantastic to have people to talk to that are on your same page, on your same wavelength. You know, I cherish a group of writers that I communicate with frequently. It's, you know, that you can talk to that understand what writing is all about, and not somebody who, you know, doesn't know and thinks you're nuts.
Yeah, that will happen, definitely. It's hard to talk about the struggles of writing with non-writers. They don't quite get it usually. Elise Johnston asks, a lot of the best thrillers include mystery. How do you go about pacing clues and figuring out how to not give it all away as the story unfolds? It's kind of $1 million question there.
Boy, we could. Okay, there's the next Wonderium course. Okay, that's what we're gonna do. Well, look, one of the great pleasures of having a mystery is, you know, having readers wondering what's going on, who's behind it, and following what's called red herrings, right? The false clues. Now, we've talked about the two different approaches. If you're, and I know there's some really good mystery writers who say, if I don't know who the killer is going to be, then the reader certainly isn't. And they write that way. There's some logic to that. On the other hand, and again, this is coming up with an ending first, is if I know the ending, if I know who did it, let's say, and I know the reason for it, what that makes possible for me as I'm writing is to drop in those red herrings, because I know what that character is doing to throw the hero off the scent, so to speak. So for me, that works. Either way can work. It's like you can discover the clues and the red herrings and so forth as you write. Sometimes, and I've done books this way, I'll be writing along and I'll say something, you know, a corpse drops through the roof, you know, the old cliche. Something happened. I put that in there. I don't know why it's there. And then I'll say, I'll figure it out later. Yeah. But other times, and for me now, it's what I call the shadow story. I like to think about what the characters who are not on the page are doing. Because as the lead character is going through the motions, these other people are planning things and doing things that the hero doesn't see. And so if I kind of start fleshing out a shadow story, I find a lot of plot material flows from that. So that's kind of a long way to give an even longer subject some attention.
Yeah, well, we'll look forward to a hopeful Wondrium course on the topic, planting some questions there for Will or pitch. Let's see. So Pernille Dybdahl Jensen asks, would the big mirror moment also apply to the romance genre?
Absolutely. There's no reason it shouldn't, because whatever the character is going through in the romance, that is an obstacle usually to and again, think of Casablanca. Here you have these two lovers, these two people that need to be together, and there's something keeping them apart. And that's what Rick deals with as he's contemplating that moment when he is so hateful to her. So absolutely, in a romance, that would be something. A lot of times it can be a psychological thing. Part of the feeling of a traditional romance is that these two need to be together to complete each other. That's kind of the feeling that the readers want to have. And so it's a psychological death, basically saying, if I'm unable to be with that person, then I'm going to die inside. So yes, a mirror moment in a romance is it applies to any genre.
Yeah, I would think so. So James, we got one more question here, and then I wanted to end with an exercise or prompt. So I'm going to make time for that as well. Okay. So the final question here is how do you avoid getting stuck in one genre of fiction? The questioner says, I have various ideas for books.
Well, that's an interesting question, because it depends really on what you're trying to accomplish in your writing life. I always think that you should at least start by writing the kind of book you love to read. That floats your boat reading, then maybe that's what you should start with. Once you've got that going, there are writers who only write a single genre their whole careers, and very successfully. However, if you want to try a different genre, there's really no reason why you can't. You need to know the genre. You need to know what kind of the conventions are and so forth. So I don't, it depends. If you end up with a contract with a publisher, they're pretty much going to want you to stick to your genre, because they're building a brand, they're building a following. If you become a huge bestseller like John Grisham, then your publisher will let you do a book over here that's more literary, as long as you come back to the legal thrillers. But give it a try. I mentioned the NaNoWriMo book that I did. I did something completely different. I did a zombie legal thriller. I felt like the zombies are always monsters. Let's make the zombie the hero. Let's make the zombie a lawyer in LA. And from that developed, I had a lot of fun writing it. It became a 3-book series. So that was fun. Have fun.
I think that's good advice, and I think even just writing in another genre, you learn a lot about writing by writing in another genre, and then you can bring it back to your preferred genre or genres as well. Well, let's close with the exercise. You mentioned having people do a voice journal for a main character before jumping into NaNoWriMo. So I'm very curious about that exercise and how it can help people write in November.
Well, I mentioned coming up with a lead character, and that's what I do. And the first thing, I want to know 2 things about this lead character. I want to know what they look like, and I want to know what they sound like. So I will go on, I used to, back in the old days, I used to get magazines, People magazine, whatever, and cut out pictures, headshots of interesting faces, and a box of these things floating around. But now you just go online, you go to a place where there's images, and you type in what you're, middle-aged salesman, and you'll come up with a bunch of faces. And what I do is I just kind of look at the faces, until one of them kind of jumps out to me that has something going on behind the eyes. It kind of says, oh, this is interesting. This is someone I might want to develop. So I get that picture and I put it into my little Scrivener corkboard. People know what Scrivener is, everybody usually. And then the voice journal. The voice journal is a free form document where I just have the character talking to me. And I have the character. I will sometimes prompt the character with questions, and I just want to keep like typing as fast as I can this character talking to me until I begin to hear a distinct voice. It's not just me writing. It's not just my voice. It's the character's voice. And I found that doing this voice journal not only is a great way to hear that voice, but you're also building up background material on the character that you could use in the book. So it doesn't take a long time to do that.
No,
you're just trying to get the feel of that voice, and you want that sound and this is true for all your characters. You want them to have a little different sound in their dialogue. Let's say you don't want people sounding the same. So the voice journal is a great way to get to do that.
I love that exercise, and I think you can find that exercise with some what if exercises and doing some thought bubbles, as you said, and that's plenty to go on. That's your novel planning. So don't psych yourself out. This was a great crash course in getting ready to write, James. So many thanks to you for sharing your wisdom and that exercise, and many thanks to Wondrium for sponsoring NaNoWriMo and sponsoring this webcast. And thank you, Will, for that great presentation as well. Wondrium can help you get ready to write, but it's there for you after the novel as well in a bunch of different ways. And I'm just going to scroll back up and remember to mention, well, actually, just go to the NaNoWriMo website, sign up to write your novel, and go to the writer's resources section, click on it, and at the offers page, you'll see Wondrium's offer, but I will remind you of it before we sign off. It is, you get 50% off the quarterly plan for the first 3 months, plus a free trial using the link on that page, and the offer expires December 18th. So go there now, sign up, and thanks everyone. Happy writing in November. Do it, all 50,000 words.